Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's my absolute great pleasure and honour to introduce Peter Taylor OBE, who will be giving the 5th Steve Hewlett Memorial Lecture this evening. As many of you are aware, Peter is a multi-award-winning journalist, not least the Lifetime Achievement Award from us, from the Royal Television Society in 2014. He is, as Sir Clive Jones puts it, quite simply one of the most trusted reporters in British television for over 50 years in the trade. Peter is best known for his coverage of the political and armed conflict in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and for his investigation of Al-Qaeda and Islamist extremism in the wake of 9/11. He also covers the issue of smoking and health and the politics of tobacco, for which he was awarded the World Health Organization Gold Medal for services to public health. The subject under discussion, integrity in television, is extraordinarily important and at this point incredibly contentious. Perhaps it has always been. It's in the news every day and appears in many guises, not least the apparent politicization these days of many issues I certainly, maybe we, were once not aware even had a political dimension. Turning to why we are here, I think many of you are also aware of the Steve Hewlett Memorial Fund. Chaired by Sir Clive Jones and managed by him, Steve's widow Rachel Crellin and John Mayer, the fund supports talented students from lower income families during their studies with cash, mentoring and sometimes some TLC. The objective is to help widen participation in our industry and to ensure that people without all the contacts, first off, but drive and talent, understand that TV journalism can really be for them. Steve himself did not come from the highest echelons of society and had a natural campaigning and social justice side to his immense body of great work. And I think Steve would be so proud of the progress of our 5 Steve Hewlett scholars, 4 of whom are here tonight. So they are Ollie Cummins-Hilton, who I don't think is here, but also Liam Morden, Georgia Keach, Oishin Thomas, sorry, I'm going to get this wrong, O'Ragale, Khadija Udin, and Lola Panich. Lovely to see you here, really smashing. Apologies for my pronunciation. So thank you all for being here and supporting both them and future scholars. And with pleasure, I shall now hand over to Peter Taylor.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you to you all for coming in these very difficult circumstances and for wearing masks. I hope you'll forgive me if I remove mine, but it's much easier talking without the mask on. Steve Hewlett was my former colleague and friend who produced 2 of the films of which I'm most proud: The Maze Prison, Enemies Within, and Remember Bloody Sunday. He was great to work with, tough-minded, sharp, and meticulous. When I was invited to give this lecture in his name, I hesitated at first, sensitive to the controversy surrounding Panorama's interview with Princess Diana, the so-called scoop of the decade. Steve was Panorama's editor at the time. According to Lord Dyson's exhaustive report, the interview was obtained by Martin Bashir's deception in forging documents to help him gain access to Diana. Lord Dyson was coruscating about aspects of the BBC's behaviour, saying it had, quote, fallen short of the high standards of integrity and transparency which are its hallmark. He recognises, however, that Steve was, quote, a skilled and highly regarded editor of Panorama, but he goes on to note, it is, of course, very sad and most unfortunate that I have not been able to put any of these accusations, that's accusations about a cover-up, to Mr. Hewlett. He concludes, no evidence has been placed before the investigation that Mr. Hewlett instigated or was party to the cover-up. And since Mr. Hewlett has not been able to answer the allegations, I find they have not been established. The fallout from the Dyson report has been seismic. Nevertheless, I think Steve would have wished me to give this lecture on integrity in television, especially at this particular time. In my experience, he cared passionately about journalism and about the BBC's public service role. What is integrity in television? It covers 4 components: impartiality, accuracy, fairness, and trust, the principles that are the bedrock of the BBC and public service broadcasting. In the first half of this lecture, I will explore those principles through the lens of my 50 years as a reporter. In the second half, I will consider how they apply given the challenges the BBC faces today, not least in maintaining its integrity in a hostile political environment. Impartiality lies at the BBC's heart. The BBC Charter, its midterm review is due in a year's time, makes it clear that the BBC's first public purpose is to provide, quotes, duly accurate and impartial news, current affairs, and factual programming. Current affairs and factual programming have been my life. For 50 years, I've covered many conflicts, from Vietnam to the miners' strike, from the Middle East to Iraq and WMD, from Al-Qaeda to ISIS, and from the secret state to smoking. But it is to the Irish conflict that my lens has always returned. I started out as a young reporter in the early 1970s, visiting Belfast for the first time, with big hair, big collar, and flares.
They call this a minor explosion, Tom. What would have happened if the local co-op in Hull had been blown up like this?
Well, the Daily Mail had been full of it for a year.
I've always tried to apply those 4 principles of integrity, impartiality, accuracy, fairness, and trust to most, if not all, of the programs I made over all those years. The problem with the number 1 principle of impartiality is that it is subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder, as was clear in the acrimonious debate over Brexit. And it's a difficult and complex notion. Perhaps some of the current and past difficulties of the BBC can be put down to different interpretations of what impartiality actually means. What the BBC aspires to is due impartiality, which means that coverage must be, quotes, adequate and appropriate to the subject under discussion. Due impartiality is not an absolute and does not require 100% neutrality on every single issue. Take, for example, the programs I made on smoking and health. Tobacco industry lobbyists claimed that I was not impartial, and my coverage of the death toll caused by smoking was, quotes, one-sided. In the early 1970s, it was difficult to be impartial when the tobacco industry refused to be interviewed and face up to the deaths of millions of its customers. This was clear when I challenged the chairman of Imperial Tobacco at the company's AGM in 1974.
2 weeks ago, here at London's Dorchester Hotel, the Imperial Group held their annual shareholders' meeting. We asked if we could film that meeting. Permission was refused. However, we were admitted without a film crew to see if our questions could be put to the then chairman of Imperial, Sir John Partridge. In his address, Sir John spoke of the responsibility of private industry to society. He said he did not think Imperial were living in a moral desert, and that perhaps they didn't always explain themselves well enough. In the question and answer session that followed, I offered Sir John an opportunity to do so. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen, shareholders, I apologise for the interruption. My name is Peter Taylor from Thames Television's This Week programme. We would like to ask the board to explain publicly and to the shareholders why they have refused to appear in our This Week programme and why they have refused to answer these questions that we have already submitted to them and the board. Sir John asked me if I were a shareholder. No, Sir John, I am not. Sir John said in that case he didn't have to answer my question. Sir John, I asked the question purely as a matter of public interest. Sit down.
That was the big hair. And I can still hear the cries of "sit down" ringing in my ears. And there were those who said I should never interview terrorists, in inverted commas, thereby giving them, in Mrs. Thatcher's famous words, the oxygen of publicity, which she later tried to extinguish with the broadcasting restrictions, which prevented TV and radio from broadcasting the actual voices of terrorists and their supporters. The restrictions backfired when some of the media hired actors to deliver the lines. One actor became richer by imitating Gerry Adams. Hostility to interviewing the so-called men of violence applied right across the board, from Northern Ireland to Islamist extremists.
What did you do?
I went out with a group of other volunteers from the EFF, and we picked up a Catholic and we took him away and we executed him.
Murdered him?
Yeah.
Shot him dead?
Yes.
A Catholic?
Yes.
Any Catholic?
Yes.
Why was he selected?
He was selected for no other reason than he was a Catholic.
No reason to believe he was involved in
No.
the Republican movement?
No.
Just an innocent 17-year-old student?
Yeah.
Who pulled the trigger?
I pulled the trigger.
You pulled the trigger?
I did, yes.
With any hesitation?
No, actually, no. I wouldn't say I had any hesitation at that time.
They see you as a terrorist because you learned how to make remote controls for bombs and you were planning to bomb somewhere in Strasbourg. That's the work, in the eyes of most people, of a terrorist.
Yeah.
If you say you're not a terrorist, what are you?
I'm a mujahid.
That interview with Jim Light still sends shivers down my spine. Integrity, which is what this lecture is about, and BBC guidelines oblige us to reflect the reality of events and not to overly sanitize our reporting. When conducting interviews such as those, and there were many, I did them to explore and question the motivation for their actions. The Mujahid, the jihadist Salim Bukhari, was radicalized by seeing the suffering of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and Muslims in Chechnya. Jim Light murdered an innocent Catholic to get the nationalist community to put pressure on the IRA to stop the killing. In Northern Ireland, I did feel an obligation to fairness and accuracy to reflect all sides of the story, which I did at the turn of the century in my BBC trilogy, Provos, Loyalist and Brits, thus exploring all three sides of the Irish conflict. And I could only make those programmes because of trust on all sides. Trust is a two-way thing. I had to gain the trust of the people I wanted to talk to, and they had to trust me. I was only able to interview Brendan Duddy, for 20 years the secret intermediary between MI6, MI5 and the IRA, because he trusted me. This was partially the result of endless hours spent talking into the night, lubricated with the odd wee dram of whiskey, which I don't normally drink, in front of a smouldering peat fire in Brendan's wee parlour in Derry. Brendan was the key link in the peace process. I kept his secret for 10 years.
This is the story of an ordinary man involved in extraordinary events. For 20 years, he was the secret link between the IRA leadership and the British government. His goal, to bring the two sides together, to talk peace. Throughout, he remained a shadowy figure, until now only known as the Link. As the conflict raged, his identity remained one of its most closely guarded secrets. Without him, the IRA's historic ceasefire, the Good Friday Agreement, and today's remarkable political settlement might never have been achieved. I've known his identity for 10 years. He promised that one day he would tell me the story of his secret double life. When the time was right. That time has finally come.
Were there moments when you thought that your life was under threat?
All the time.
all the time. There was people dying everywhere. There was people being blown up everywhere. People were living on the very edge. And I think there would have been no tolerance for somebody who was saying, well, you've got to try and understand us. Let's talk. I wanted to show people that actually the world can be changed.
It took years to establish trust in Northern Ireland, a society as divided then as ours is today, not least because of Brexit on both sides of the Irish Sea. These bitter divisions place an even heavier responsibility on journalists, with each side of the divide ready, metaphorically, to shoot the messengers for the news, whether they report for the BBC, ITV, Channel 4 or Sky. And the BBC is first in the political firing line, for reasons that I will come to later, despite the fact that the BBC is by far and away the most trusted broadcaster for news, countering the osmotic and potentially corrosive effect of social media. I begin with Bloody Sunday, and appropriately, since that was the first documentary I made with Steve, and Bloody Sunday was my initiation into the Irish conflict 50 years ago. For a naive young reporter on his first assignment in Ireland, there could hardly be a sterner test of the four key components of integrity: impartiality, accuracy, fairness, and trust. This is my diary from 1972. It was the day after Bloody Sunday. And I write, "Here I am in Northern Ireland, in Derry. I am a bit apprehensive, I admit, keeping fingers crossed, all been quiet today." And that was the day I went down into the bogside for the first time. It was clear that 13 people had been shot dead, and it appeared to have been shot dead by members of the parachute regiment. And I remember walking into the bogside, and you could touch the silence almost. And there were pools of blood where those who'd been shot had fallen and died. And already there were flowers by the pools of blood. But this was here in Derry, in a corner of the United Kingdom. And I remember feeling guilty on two counts. First of all, that my soldiers, me being a Brit, appeared to have shot dead 13 innocent civil rights marchers. Never having been to Derry before, not knowing where Derry was, I also felt guilty that I didn't know what was going on. And there and then, I decided I'd better find out what it was all about. The first interview I ever did in Ireland was with a former British soldier called Jack Chapman. He was living in the Bogside, the nationalist enclave in Derry beneath its city walls. His first floor flat gave him a grandstand view of the killings around the barricade just below. I interviewed him 2 days after Bloody Sunday, the day that soldiers of the parachute regiment shot dead 13 innocent civil rights marchers protesting about internment.
Derry, straight one, take one, Mr. Chapman.
What did you see happen?
The civil march itself proceeded down William Street in quite an orderly fashion, I thought. At about 4 o'clock, I saw 7 Saracen armoured cars fanning out over the west area. The troops immediately got out of their armoured cars, followed by about 100 paratroopers, and they immediately got down into firing positions and fired indiscriminately into the fleeing crowd who were running past my house. All the shooting was done by the army, every bit of it, no doubt whatsoever at all.
These are not just allegations.
These are not allegations, these are actual statements of fact.
The facts are we were fired at first, and we retaliated in the only way which was possible to us. which was return fire.
The army officers making the statements to say that they were fired on by snipers is a complete fabrication, nothing else.
I made him sandwiches and a cup of tea before he left and said we'd have the dinner for 6. So Jerry lifted me up and gave me a kiss and a hug and said I'll see you at 6 though. I just knew inside myself that Jerry was dead. When I saw my brother John crying, and I knew for sure then.
Bloody Sunday marks the bookends of my career. My coverage began in 1972 and will continue next January with a documentary for Radio 4 to mark the 50th anniversary of that dreadful day. Impartiality, accuracy, fairness and trust were all required to interpret the killings whose repercussions continue today, with the victims still demanding justice. Where did truth lie? One side, Catholics and nationalists, were telling me innocent civil rights marchers had been shot dead in cold blood by British paratroopers, whilst the other side, the paras, insisted they had come under intensive fire from the IRA. At the time, and over the decades that followed, fairness meant letting both sides give their own account of what happened. The film I made 4 days after the tragedy was appropriately called Two Sides of a Story. Bloody Sunday was a supreme test: fairness to both sides, impartiality, not favouring one version of events over the other, and trust, the vital ingredient of getting people to talk. I interrogated both sides and left viewers to make up their own minds. It took me years to get an interview with Colonel Derek Wilford, and many hours to gain his trust.
Do you accept that many of those who were killed, if not all of them, in the eyes of the people of the Bogside and Craigan, were in fact innocent civilians?
Oh no, I can't accept that, because that would be to accept that my soldiers were wrong, and I don't believe they were wrong. There might have been some things wrong in the sense that innocent people in fact who were not carrying a weapon, were shot and wounded or even killed. But that was not done as a deliberate, malicious act. It was done as an act, if you like, of war.
That was from an interview I did in 1992 on the 20th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Nearly 30 years later, in 2019, I interviewed Derek Wilford again. I hesitated to approach him as he was not in good health. Derek Wilford is now 85 and has Parkinson's disease. It has ended his work as an artist. Do you now accept what Lord Savile said?
No, I don't. Because I was there. Well, we thought, in fact, that we were under attack. And we will actually remain convinced of that, actually, until the end of our days.
I've just interviewed Lord Savile for my Radio 4 documentary next month. His epic inquiry took 12 years and cost almost £200 million. We also filmed the interview for Newsnight. Colonel Wilford does not accept your findings. He insists that his men did come under fire, and he says, you weren't there. I was, as the commanding officer, you...
Indeed, he has said that.
You weren't there.
I wasn't there, but thousands of other people were, and we talked to them.
So has Colonel Wilford simply got it wrong?
Yes, I believe that he has. He was very loyal to his soldiers. He was an extremely popular commanding officer, and he obviously came to the conclusion that he couldn't let his soldiers down, and has remained loyally supportive of him. I understand that, but I don't agree with his view of what happened.
What has Bloody Sunday done to you?
I think it destroyed my world.
I think Derek Wilford's face says it all. But it also destroyed the world of all those who lost their loved ones that day. When I reviewed my coverage of Bloody Sunday 2 years ago for my documentary, My Journey Through the Troubles, I was criticised in some quarters for expressing what appeared to be a personal view. If I'd been a teenager that day on Bloody Sunday, I probably would have joined the IRA. I would have considered taking that final step, which is what happened to hundreds of young Catholics, men and women. Because I think what Bloody Sunday did was legitimise violence. You know, if the state can use violence against us, we will use violence against the state. My remarks were controversial, but I don't believe they breached the BBC's cardinal principle of due impartiality or undermined the BBC's integrity. I used the personal analogy to try to bring home to viewers the powerful emotions and visceral anger that led so many young men and women to join the IRA. Given the requirements of due impartiality and relying on experience and judgment, having covered the conflict for so many years, I considered that my remarks were adequate and appropriate given the circumstances. The BBC's Director General, Tim Davie, has described impartiality as sacrosanct, the core of the BBC's being. Its centrality was brought home to me again in a documentary I made earlier this year, Ireland After Partition, marking the centenary of the legislation that divided Ireland in 1921. The conclusion of the film, The Future, was always going to be the most difficult and potentially contentious. I was sensitive to sections of the audience perhaps wondering at the end of the programme, well, what does he think? He must have a view. This is what I said. But the issue of a united Ireland that runs through the films I've made, like the lettering in a stick of rock, remains unresolved. Nothing is ever inevitable, but it may be that at some stage in the future, a united Ireland does emerge, in whatever form it takes. That may be a day that I don't live to see, but I suspect my children might. Unless there's agreement on what form a united Ireland would eventually take, agreement between the British government, the Dublin government, and the people of Northern Ireland, crucially, there can never be peace. The conflict will continue. And that's the challenge. In that final link, I walked a tightrope, given the political sensitivities over Irish unity. All the other links in the film were unscripted and ad-libbed to camera, apart from that one. I had to be sure that I was expressing a professional judgment, not a personal opinion. In the end, and in the interests of due impartiality, I decided to write it to make sure I got it right. I was happy. I hope viewers were happy too. The political climate in which the BBC operates today is perhaps as difficult as it has ever been, as it seeks to maintain its integrity. It walks a fine line between defending its independence from government whilst admitting its mistakes, as it did after Lord Dyson's report, an admission that some of the BBC's critics have seized to use against it. The freedom and the independence of the BBC and its journalism are challenged by endemic hostility in some quarters of today's Conservative Party, echoed by its supporters on the ground and in the media. The hostility is held to be institutional against the idea of a publicly funded public service broadcaster, and ideological when it comes to the licence fee, which some politicians see as an unwarranted and unwanted tax. The hostility goes back a long way. In 2004, a blog for the website of the New Frontiers Foundation, a free market think tank of which Dominic Cummings was the director, described the BBC as the mortal enemy of the Conservative Party and said, quotes, "Its privileged, closed world needs to be turned upside down," and it advocated the undermining of the BBC's credibility. But the hostility is not unique to the Conservative Party. The Labour government of the 1970s wanted to do something about the BBC and get rid of the licence fee. And Alistair Campbell, Tony Blair's Rottweiler, was no friend. The fallout from the row over WMD and the tragic death of David Kelly at the time of the Iraq War were almost as seismic as the fallout from Panorama's interview with Princess Diana. The political pressures are constant and go way back to the BBC's infancy when it came under intense political attack for its coverage of the general strike of 1926. Lord Reith wrote in his diary, "Churchill wants to commandeer the BBC," and warned that such a dramatic move would compromise the BBC's impartiality and independence. That was after Churchill had said it was monstrous not to use broadcasting in support of the government's position. Government pressure over the BBC's coverage of the Falklands War also springs to mind. I remember being criticised by sections of the media for conducting a civilised, as opposed to a hostile, interview with Argentina's UN ambassador at the height of the war. As we've seen, political pressure is constant throughout the BBC's history, but an editorial crisis such as that detailed by Lord Dyson makes it especially vulnerable. Oliver Dowden, Nadine Dorris's predecessor as Secretary of State at the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, didn't hold back in an opinion piece he wrote for The Times last May, following the publication of the Dyson report. He wrote, "The BBC needs to improve its culture to ensure this never happens again, and that means a new emphasis on accuracy, impartiality and diversity of opinion. The BBC can occasionally succumb to the we know best attitude. Groupthink in any organisation results in a lack of challenge and poor decision making. That's why cultural change must be a focus for the Director General and the new chair." Director General Tim Davie has faced a Herculean task in steadying the ship, restoring morale and letting the government know that the BBC hears what it says. His 10-point impartiality plan and other measures designed to enshrine the BBC's values sends a message to the DCMS, which will set the licence fee next April, the message being that the BBC's house is being put in order. Personally, I don't see the BBC that Mr. Dowden describes. The BBC has not been deaf to its critics. The hope is that it will encourage a more benevolent political approach to the licence fee settlement. The Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorris, has accused the BBC of snobbery and a kind of groupthink that excludes working class people. Again, I beg to differ. I was brought up in a council house in Yorkshire. Our spoons were not silver, and I went to a state school. The BBC that I know and see today is not elitist or sexist or racist, although there are others who would challenge this. It embraces all genders and ethnicities and has done more to reflect the society of which it is a part. It is unrecognisable from the BBC I began working for over 40 years ago. Crucial though impartiality is, what underpins the BBC and makes it central to our freedom and democracy is its independence of government. This is guaranteed by the BBC's charter, which requires the BBC board to, quote, uphold and protect the independence of the BBC, neither seeking nor taking instructions from government ministers or any other person. Without its independence of government, the BBC risks becoming a mouthpiece for whoever holds the keys to number 10. If that independence is sacrificed, then a vital cornerstone of our democracy dies with it. And the BBC isn't the only public service broadcaster at risk. There are concerns too about Channel 4's independence if government plans to privatise it bear fruit. Steve Hewlett, in whose name I am giving this lecture, worked for the BBC, ITV and Channel 4. And I always remember a documentary I made with Steve in 1990 at the height of the broadcasting restrictions, when Mrs. Thatcher was Prime Minister, because the documentary brought home to me the crucial independence to programme makers of the BBC's independence. We filmed inside the top security Maze prison, interviewing Republican and Loyalist prisoners and hearing voices which the government had tried to silence. It was a remarkable film, which, in addition to the voices of so-called terrorists, it showed a Loyalist band celebrating the anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne with homemade uniforms and homemade drums. Without the guidance of the BBC's editorial policy team and without the BBC's editorial independence in the face of the draconian broadcasting restrictions, I don't think that film would ever have been made. In the end, integrity in television, impartiality, accuracy, fairness, and trust depend on independence. We can no longer take the BBC's existence for granted. It is engaged in a life or death struggle which those at the helm know they have to win. The fact is that government holds the purse strings and sets the licence fee on which the BBC depends. Without adequate funding, the BBC simply cannot compete, and in the long term risks being suffocated by the bottomless billions of the streaming giants. Despite financial restrictions, BBC documentaries are still outstanding. I'm thinking of programmes like Blair and Brown and Once Upon a Time in Iraq. The BBC's rivals also make outstanding documentaries like ITV's Storming the Capitol and Channel 4's QAnon, The Cult of Conspiracy. And of course, there are many others. But the real world in which the BBC now operates is painful. Budgets are cut, morale is low, hundreds of journalists are being made redundant, retiring or leaving, many of them the most senior and experienced journalists. Esme Wren, the much admired editor of Newsnight, is saying goodbye to become editor of Channel 4 News, while John Humphreys, Eddie Mayer, Carrie Gracie, John Pienaar, Simon McCoy, Mark Mardell, David Shukerman, and many others have already gone. It's a worrying hemorrhage of vast experience and authority. Fran Unsworth, the Director of News and Current Affairs, is leaving too after 40 years, having had the unenviable task of grasping the poisoned chalice of overseeing 450 job cuts and savings of £80 million. The most recent and highest profile departure is Andrew Marr, who announced he was leaving the BBC after 21 years to, quote, get his own voice back and enjoy new freedom. Andrew will now be at liberty to express his personal views, which he was constrained from doing whilst at the BBC. Let us hope that in the strained political climate, the BBC's editorial processes, with their detailed monitoring and assessment of output against a panoply of protocols, is not the harbinger of a big brother culture induced by political pressure. Thank goodness we're not China, where its 200,000 accredited journalists have to take 90 hours of continued education to make sure they are, quotes, politically firm and professionally excellent. The BBC will be 100 years old next October. It's one of the nation's crown jewels, embodying the principles of Lord Reith and admired and envied the world over. The loss will only be felt once it has gone. Its vast global audience, nourished by the World Service, will wonder how and why it happened. That's why it has to be cherished and protected, not just by the BBC itself, but by its millions of viewers and listeners, the licence payers who fund it and make it what it is. If the BBC has got the message from the government, I hope the government has got the message from the BBC and from its supporters around the country and around the world. I accept the TV landscape on which I first set foot half a century ago as an experienced young researcher has changed beyond recognition. Change is inevitable and necessary to ensure the BBC's survival. The BBC is central to our freedoms and the health of our democracy, underpinned by the values I've tried to reflect in my 50 years through the lens, the component parts of integrity, impartiality, accuracy, fairness, and trust. I hope this evening's young beneficiaries of the Steve Hewlett Memorial Scholarship will embrace and protect those values as they embark on their careers. I congratulate them all and wish them well. And finally, just before this lecture, Steve's widow Rachel wrote to me and said, "Steve will be amazed that we are now supporting young people from tough backgrounds because of the money raised by donations and lectures. To me, it is comforting, and that something so positive has come out of the tragedy of losing Steve." Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for a truly inspiring lecture in what has proved to be a difficult year for journalism and public service broadcasting generally. And with the Channel 4 debates and the continuing debates about funding of the BBC, it could be another difficult year ahead. I only wish the integrity that has been at the heart of your reporting for so many decades was currently being mirrored in other places and in other roles. But that's a different discussion. Thank you, brave souls who have risked the pandemic to be with us tonight. For those more prudent who are soon to be watching at home, please don't hesitate to reach for your credit cards and donate to the bursary fund set up in Steve's memory immediately the stream is over, and the details will be rolling through on the screen. Thank you again to the University of Westminster for providing the venue for the Hewlett. We are in your debt. Thanks to John and the production team, the RTS and the Media Society for continuing to sponsor the Hewlett and for promoting it so vigorously. The fund, I can report, is in rude financial health, able to benefit now from a £50,000 investment fund with the money made from the annual lecture each year on top of that. As Teresa mentioned, we already helped 6 students, or are helping 6 students through their university courses, and 4 of them are here with us tonight. Some are already progressing their way through industry. Our first was Ollie Cummins-Hilton. After graduating with a BA in broadcast journalism from Salford in 2020, Ollie went on to complete an MA in documentary filmmaking this year and is now working for an independent production company, Blast Films. Liam Warden graduated this summer with a BA Hons in journalism at Sheffield University. He has recently started at Sky Sports as part of Sky's Content Academy and had a thrilling weekend sorting out the Formula One battle over the weekend. After graduating last summer from the University of Sussex with a BA in journalism, Georgia Keach is now studying for an MA in media and cultural studies. She is also editor-in-chief of Badger, the university newspaper. Ozzy Thomas O'Reilly is studying PPE at Queen's University Belfast and continuing to make his own films. Khadija Udin is studying for a BA Hons in Cardiff in journalism, communication and politics. And our new student is here today, Lola Panic, who is studying at Goldsmiths for a BA in media and communications. Congratulations on your new award, Lola. Finally, let me hand to Liam, the man who's been battling with Formula One, so he can explain how our bursaries help him through the university and into a job. Liam.
Thank you. Hello everyone. Just over 3 years ago, I received a phone call to say that I had been awarded the Steve Hewlett Scholarship. I remember feeling a sense of pride, relief and excitement as I was about to begin my journalism degree at University of Sheffield. Looking back to when I first arrived at this lecture, I found it overwhelming as I was rubbing shoulders with influential people across the industry. I felt nervous, a little bit unconfident, and would have dreaded the idea of speaking at this lectern, yet here I am. That was the first of many experiences that the Royal Television Society has to offer. Of course, there is the obvious financial benefit of the scheme, which put me on a financial level playing field with other students, but there is so much more value in the scholarship than that. It has opened up my perspective, broadened my horizons and boosted my confidence through participating in events such as the masterclasses, being paired with a mentor, and building a support network with other wonderful recipients. Not even COVID could stop the RTS when it disrupted my course halfway through the university, as their events moved online. Ultimately, the scholarship has sparked my curiosity and drive to succeed, especially when it provided me with work experience opportunities at both Channel 4 and Sky News. I'll never forget covering the general election in 2019 with Sky News, as these experiences moulded my aspirations and built up my confidence. They proved to be invaluable when applying for jobs in a post-COVID world, where the competition for places is so high. The scholarship gave me a leg up into the industry, given me a competitive edge, and it has pushed me to succeed. Now I stand here today, embarking on the beginning of my own career within the industry, working as a junior assistant producer as part of Sky Sports' Content Academy. Me, coming from a single-parent household with no relation to media whatsoever, is currently working at one of the biggest broadcasters in the country. Just last weekend, I had the privilege to be involved in that controversial climax of the Formula One season, and I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of opinions on that too. But it was watched by over 7.4 million people, which I just can't even comprehend. I would like to have the opportunity to thank you all for your generous contributions that make this all possible. I feel honoured to be a recipient of this scholarship, and I believe that Steve Hewlett's legacy will live on through the success of its scholars. I would like to also say a personal thanks to the Royal Television Society, the Media Society, and to Rachel Crellin for believing in me by giving me this wonderful opportunity. It has changed my life. Thank you.
Boy, you might go far. Please join us for a drink. Thank you very much for coming.